President Bola Tinubu, chair of ECOWAS, has hailed the deepening economic partnership between Africa and China. At the opening ceremony on the China-Africa cooperation in Beijing, Tinubu highlighted the exponential growth in trade between the two regions, now estimated at $280 billion. Addressing an audience that included African and Chinese leaders, as well as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Tinubu emphasized the importance of continued cooperation in trade, investment, and cultural exchange, despite global challenges. Now, the ECOWAS chairman describes the partnership as grounded in mutual respect, sovereignty, and non-interference. He underscored that China's Belt and Road Initiative aligns closely with Africa's infrastructure goals under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, offering new opportunities for growth, for economic growth.
Cultural entertainment and display of diversity in excellence in learning and collaboration. Thank you very much. It is with a great joy and pleasure that I stand before you today, celebrating the remarkable partnership between Africa and China, a bond that has not only endured, but has grown stronger since its inception in the early 50s. This relationship has transcended continents, challenges, and become a true testament to the power of mutual respect and cooperation. What began as a China support for African nations' independence has evolved into a rich, multifaceted partnership spanning trade, investment, and diplomacy. Over years of our ties, we have been solidified. We share through high-level engagement, strategic agreement, and a shared vision of growth. Today,
President Tinubu there. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has pledged over $50 billion in financing for Africa over the next 3 years, promising to deepen cooperation in infrastructure and trade with the continent as he addressed Beijing's biggest summit since the pandemic. Now, more than 50 African leaders and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres are attending this week's China-Africa Forum. African leaders already secured this week a plethora of deals for greater cooperation in infrastructure, agriculture, mining, trade, and energy. Addressing the leaders at the forum's opening ceremony in Beijing's ornate Great Hall of the People on Thursday morning, Xi hailed ties with the continent as in their best period in history. Now, over half of the funds will be in credit, with $11 billion in various types of assistance, as well as $10 billion through encouraging Chinese firms to invest. He also promised to create or help create at least 1 million jobs for Africa. Now, joining me to discuss the ongoing forum on China-Africa cooperation in Beijing and China's pledge of $50 billion financial aid to Africa in deepening China-Africa relations is former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Nurudeen Mohammed. Thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you on Newsnight.
Thank you, Madam, for having me.
Well, for many observers, they actually believe, let's start on this other note first before we get into the excitement of the $50 billion, or if it's anything to be excited about. Allegations that China's lending has actually put, a lot more pressure and debt burden on African countries.
Yeah,
Do you agree with that?
I will not exactly agree, but I would like to analyze why the skeptics think so. Because of default of some of these loans, the lack of transparency in some of these loans, and of course, the accusation from the Western world particularly that China is flaunting the rules-based world order in negotiating some of these things with these African countries. This is a general criticism of the China-Africa investment, economic, and infrastructure engagement. Well, my personal opinion is I'm a process person. And, once processes are criticized, what is left for us is to look at the criticism and look at ways we can improve because the experience of Sri Lanka that has defaulted from very heavy Chinese loan, from very heavy Chinese loan, you know, and Chinese had to take over the airports and the seaports for 100 years.
Like it has in some African countries.
Yes, so these are the concerns, you know. So let us look at some of these what do you call them, agreements, you know, cross the T's, dot the I's, as they say, you know, use our magnifying glasses and see what are the problems. I believe cheap financing is critical to national and continental development. So if the loans are cheap, we should look at the terms, renegotiate them, become more transparent, and if need be, have some rules attached to them.
Right. As
they say, the world rules-based world order.
There you go. So let's talk about this $50 billion pledge that will be disbursed within within a 3-year window. To what extent, really, do you think Nigeria can actually benefit, from this loan? 50 billion for Africa. Some are saying, look, it doesn't go far enough in providing huge infrastructure development that African countries need. That it might just be some kind of tokenism. But, setting that aside, to what extent can Nigeria best benefit from this?
Well, you have raised very important issues while asking the question. The 50 billion comes with a caveat. It's over 2 years. So it's not like a decade or if you look at the quantum of the Chinese investment in Africa, starting from 2005 to date, it's almost in the region of $2 trillion. And this is no surprise, looking at the critical importance of the African continent in the emerging world order, 54 sovereign states, 17% of the world's population. A market of 1.3 billion people, it's estimated to reach 2.5 billion by 2050. And 25% of these, 65%, in fact, will be under 25. Home to 17% of, 9.6 exactly percent of proven oil reserve, 90% of cobalt, 90% of platinum, manganese, more than half of world gold deposits. So these are the attractions Africa has, not only to China, but other global. So coming back to how Nigeria will benefit, Nigeria has benefited before now. A lot of Chinese investment opportunities in Nigeria, in railway, in agriculture, in investment. And if what we enumerated are the attractions of Africa to the outside world, China inclusive, then when you come to Africa, Nigeria is a beautiful bride.
There you go.
Population, resources, and of course the young, youthful population. As
President Tinubu pointed that.
Exactly.
Pointed it out at the
so I'm sure Nigeria will get a chunk,
but Nigeria will get a chunk, yes, expectedly, hopefully.
Reasonable chunk.
A reasonable chunk.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like China really clearly defined in what areas, that these funds will go into. If you were to advise the Nigerian government, which sectors would you say that, whatever it gets should be priority?
Well, of course, if you look at the whole China-Africa relationship, is a lot of infrastructure deficits in Africa. And of course, China with their signed checks. So That's why they're here. It's mostly about infrastructure, investment, construction. China is financing 1 in 5, 3 in 5, in fact, infrastructure projects in Africa. And is in fact doing a third herself. So coming to Nigeria, if I were to advise, I will seriously take a look at the agricultural sector, and of course transportation. We are facing acute shortage of food. Food security is becoming an existential problem to this country. So if you can have this quantum of investment coming into the agricultural sector, and of course from China with less rules, conditionalities, what will be left for us is the sincerity and the commitment to be fair to our people and put our money where our mouth is, as they will say in Nigeria.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of which, China's trade surplus with Africa, let me look at the figures, rose to a record $64 billion in 2023. Now, South Africa at this meeting has clearly stated, that's Ramaphosa's, South Africa, is asking for more sustainable manufacturing and job-creating investments. Very clearly. Senegal, too, has laid out what it really wants. I believe, of course, our president too has, stated that clearly. Let's talk about the 1 million jobs that China says it will also provide, and even train military, especially when you consider the, situation, no jobs, and of course insecurity in many parts of Africa.
So let me start from the training the military side, which is geostrategic or geosecurity perspectives. Lately, China is showing interest in deploying military, even beyond military training and assistance, on African soil. Take the case of Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. So this may be a renewed approach to in their foreign policy, beyond economic diplomacy, trade, and investments, now to use military power to deploy. So now, coming to what Ramaphosa and Senegal said, and which I believe even Nigerian president perhaps will have to point that out, the cause of the deficits in our trade was any partner, not only China, is our weak manufacturing base. We don't manufacture. We export primary goods. We export jobs with primary goods. So this should, as a matter of fact, be the irreducible minimum the Africans should demand from all these global powers seeking their hands in marriage, as it were, that we won't be assisted to improve our manufacturing base, provide jobs for our people, and reduce restiveness. If these things are put in place, there is no need to train our military. The restiveness will be able to be manageable. So I 100% subscribe to that. And that flows directly into my sentiment of investment in agriculture and infrastructure.
But how do you ensure, how do African leaders, when all 50 of them go to China, yes, this is a relationship that's expected to be mutually beneficial, but some skeptics, like you, called them earlier, are saying, look, is this really about partnership between equal nations? Or is it another kind of colonialism, if you like? How will African leaders, or how should they ensure that with all of these gifts, some described it as Greek gifts and what have you, that the sovereignty of the African continent is not jeopardized?
Well, you have touched on a very important issue, and I know during my stay in the foreign ministry, this issue has been debated very hotly and passionately about these partnerships, these omnibus partnerships between not so much global powers and the entirety of Africa. Africa, this forum, Africa, that forum, Africa. And how at the beginning of these partnerships, some diplomats with foresight had warned that this arrangement where African leaders will crowd themselves in some metropolitan capital and be lectured, as it were, on trade and investment, and then later be given some checks doesn't speak well of our sovereignty. Well, that has already happened. Africa is now in partnership with so many sovereigns, which may not be appropriate if things were put in proper perspective. So yes, our sovereignty is the concerns the naysayers had was the issue of the sovereignty, that one sovereign dealing with 54 sovereigns, that reduces the sovereignty of the 54.
Of the 50, right.
So I think beyond the checks and the pecks we get, I think it's about time we start looking at these partnerships for what they are, what they put table for us. African Union maybe trying to sit down and renegotiate some of these terms, and which country put a guideline for any country versus Africa forum. Let that be.
Isn't this where Nigeria needs to pull her weight as a leader in Africa?
Yes, that's a natural leadership role we have.
Right.
If Nigeria were pulling her weight, most of these things wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
So for decades, I'm sorry to say, Nigeria has not been able to pull her weight appropriately at that level. We could have pulled our weights in so many fora, but when it comes to this issue of manufacturing, military power, surplus funds, signed checks for infrastructure, Nigeria cannot compete for now, unfortunately.
I wish I could say it's a good place to live it, but I have to say it's a good place to live it. Nurudeen Mohammed, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, thank you very much for your insight.